I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin at 4700 Grover Avenue. Welcome to our forum. Our forums are free and occur most Sundays at noon. You can find out more about our forums by going to our website at www.austinuu.org. We have a great program today, and now I'm going to ask Dale Beulah, one of our very active forum committee members, to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Bonnie. Good morning, everyone. Coal may finally be nearing an end in Austin. Of course, we've heard that before, but we're going to be encouraged today, I believe. The Austin Energy, Austin City Council, Austin Mayor Lee Leffingwell all seem ready to do away with this dirtiest of fuels that provides about 20% of our city's power. And what is the best way for Texas premier green city to quit its 30-year addiction? The two paths seem to be open. One is to sell and one is to retire. And each course has its advocates. Which decision Austin makes will have a lot to say about the kind of community that we live in and the future of this community. We have one of those advocates here today, Jeff Crunk. He is a volunteer with the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal. He believes that fuels like solar and wind are much better choices for Austin right now, and that power without coal would mean a world of difference to the children and grandchildren that will come in the future. He's a graduate of Baylor University, so I know he's extra happy this morning. He has a master's degree in history. He attended the University of Kansas for an advanced degree in environmental history. Since the birth of his daughter in '08, Jeff and his wife Sharon have made a choice to be very active in the struggle to preserve a livable climate here in Central Texas, and they ask for your help. So let's please welcome Jeff Crunk to our podium this morning.
Thank you, Dale, for that introduction. I'm very pleased to be here in this speakers forum. I've been sitting in the pews before as a listener to other distinguished speakers, and I'm happy to be here. I want to thank Bonnie, I want to thank Dale, and the other members of the Public Affairs Forum Committee for the invitation. Today I'm going to share my perspective on where Austin is in its ongoing effort to be a national leader in clean energy and to be a leader on climate change by making Austin coal-free. My perspective comes from being a volunteer with the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign here in Austin. I've been a volunteer with Austin Beyond Coal since the fall of 2011, and in that time I've got to do a lot of fun things with other grassroots organizers here in town. I've gone to the Austin Ice Cream Festival and told folks that we have a public utility and we own a coal plant. I've been out to the Swiss Festival in Jonestown, visited a lot of churches, have done some house parties where the presentation like this is a little bit cozier. So I really enjoy those things. I'm enjoying the opportunity to be with you here today. I've been experienced with PowerPoint for about a week, so I'm much more concerned about that than anything else. We'll see how that goes. More power to me. Over 30 years ago, Austin Energy, your public utility, added coal to its generation. This coming year, 2014, could be the year, and I hope will be the year, that we take it out of the generation mix. Next year, Austin City Council will review and reauthorize the strategic goals for the utility. With regards to coal, this means choosing one of three paths. Austin can keep coal in the fuel mix to 2020 and beyond. Austin can choose to sell its coal asset to some other third party. Or Austin can phase out and shut down coal over the next 3 years. And today I want to talk about why the choice to retire coal is the better choice and the course that Austin should pursue. The Austin Beyond Coal campaign, like I said, it was launched in 2011, and it set out these three goals. Number one, to make Austin the #1 clean energy city in the country by making Austin coal-free. And this is no more than the goal Austin set for itself in its Climate Protection Plan of 2010. Number two, protect our public health and a livable climate for our children by shifting from high-emission, water-sucking fossil fuels, which means, in Austin's case, to get out of coal responsibly, to make sure we're achieving actual carbon reductions and by retiring the plant and not just achieving carbon reductions on an accounting sheet. And number 3, develop a clean energy economy to secure genuinely sustainable communities in Central Texas. So the Austin Beyond Coal campaign is itself part of a larger national effort by the Sierra Club. The National Beyond Coal campaign was launched back during the Bush administration. Some of you may recall that the first big policy push under the Bush administration was on energy. Vice President Cheney led a national task force that ended up recommending that the nation build out more than 150 new coal plants. Well, this was occurring at a time when climate scientists, both here in the United States, were actually saying that we should be going in the opposite direction, that this was sort of a crazy thing to do. James Hansen, in testimony before Congress at the time, said that there is no realistic chance to preserve a livable climate in the future if we continue to burn coal for electricity at the rates that we're doing. So in response to this proposal by the Bush administration, the Sierra Club launched a Beyond Coal campaign, which initially was just about an attempt to blunt this rush to build new coal plants. And in that effort, the campaign was remarkably successful of what turned out to be more than 200 proposals for coal plants, some of which were to be built in Texas. The vast majority of those were stopped as the Sierra Club worked with other organizations at the grassroots level to push back. More recently, the Sierra Club has moved into phase 2 of a Beyond Coal campaign with the goal of retiring 1/3 of the nation's existing coal-fired power plants by 2015. And in this graph, you can get a sense that this goal is well on the way to being completed. I checked the website the other night. To date, the count stands at 157 coal plants that the Sierra Club has helped secure commitments to retire at an accelerated rate. Okay, I have become something that I wasn't 2 years ago. I've become a community organizer and a grassroots advocate. I was raised as a Lutheran where you're not used to stepping out and stepping forward. It's much more comfortable to be quiet. But now this is my favorite slide and the most important slide. If you'd like to help us move your city beyond coal, please reach out to David Cortez, who's here with me today. He's our staff director and field organizer with Sierra Club, or you can contact myself at the second email address, the Mid-Bosque address. Coal plants tend not to shut down themselves. So if you'd like to join us, I can also point you to other great organizations in town like Climate Buddies, like the Interfaith Environmental Network, like Wild Earth Austin, the Citizens Climate Lobby, a lot of great groups in town who are all working on the climate problem or some facet of it. So let me sort of get into my story about the Fayette Power Plant. Austin gets all its electricity from a single source. This is the Fayette plant. It's located in Fayette County near LaGrange. You can see the facility if you're driving from Austin to Houston out on 71 Highway. It's off to your left. The Fayette plant is composed of 3 separate generating units. Units 1 and 2 were built in 1979 and 1980. And each one of those has a nameplate capacity of about 600 megawatts. Now, curiously and somewhat oddly, and unlike other places in the country, there's an odd sort of legal operational arrangement in those 2 plants. Austin Energy owns 50% of Stack 1, it owns 50% of Stack 2, and the other halves of those 2 stacks are owned by LCRA, that's the Lower Colorado River Authority. So we may get a chance in question and answers to talk about why that's significant in getting out of the coal plant. There is a 3rd stack at the plant. It was built in 1988. It's somewhat smaller. It has a capacity of about 500 megawatts, and it's wholly owned by LCRA. In total, the Fayette plant has a capacity of 1,600 megawatts, but in all those numbers, the one I want you to just sort of take away, Austin share, 600 megawatts. It's just the main thing to take away there. The scale of this facility is impressive to me. The plant burns 550 train loads of coal a year. It uses 100,000 tons of limestone from a New Braunfels quarry for the scrubbing slurry. The coal is shipped to the plant by rail from Wyoming. It's Powder River Basin coal. a lot of the fuel that a lot of the coal that Texas gets is from Wyoming. And the reason we do that is this Wyoming coal is lower in sulfur content than the dirtier lignite coal that we have here in Texas. And if we were to burn the lignite coal that has much higher sulfur content, Austin, San Antonio, a lot of the cities would be out of compliance with federal clean air regulations. Another just interesting factoid to me, the coal is shipped on 1,480 rail cars that LCRA itself owns. LCRA owns a coal plant, and they also own a rail line. Austin Energy's share of the generation portfolio coming from coal. On 3 decades, it's mostly been about 1/3 of the total energy the city gets. In recent years, it's slipped more to 25%. And the reason for that is the city's adding more and more wind to the city portfolio. And as we do that, we're choosing to dial back our use of coal. This is exactly in keeping with our goals and our climate protection plan. Now, historically, coal has a reputation for being an inexpensive way to generate power. The coal industry itself touts as its big selling points that coal is cheap and coal is reliable. In recent years, coal has been getting more expensive for our utility. So on the slide here, the red line shows fuel cost, just how much it cost Austin Energy to buy coal from Wyoming. The green line shows non-fuel costs. These are operating costs at the plant. The costs are expressed in dollars per megawatt hour. So the dramatic increase here in the last 5 or 6 years has been in the fuel cost, which has doubled since 2007. The operation costs have increased a little steadily over time. This is mostly due to just wear and tear on an aging coal facility. There's a lot of heat, there's a lot of pressure there, and as all these coal plants age, it takes more to keep them going. Sort of to digress here a little bit from just Fayette, the story here in this slide for escalating cost on coal at our utility is the story of coal writ large throughout the nation. If you go back to 2008, coal comprises 50% of the nation's total electric generating capacity. You step forward to the present and we've dropped down to 40%. And this is primarily because coal is getting beat up in the marketplace. The cost for coal generation is gradually and steadily escalating over time. The cost of competitors to coal in the market, natural gas, wind, they're plummeting. And solar is going to be right behind that. So just in terms of market share, coal is not able to innovate, right, like natural gas has with lateral fracking, like wind does with being much more efficient in economies of scale, more efficient wind turbines, etc. So interestingly, again, the more we pay more for coal at Fayette, the less we use the plant. This slide is showing the capacity at which we use the available power to us at Fayette over time. So in 2007, we used about 83% of the total capacity at the plant, moved to 2011, and it's 73%. So for the environment and for public health, this is a really good thing because we're putting less of the harmful emissions in coal into the environment. We're using less of the water it takes to run the plant. But as I've visited with folks who tell me how coal works sort of operationally, this is not the most effective way to run a plant from a business perspective. It's a more inefficient way to run the plant. Coal plants apparently are designed to perform best at higher capacity rates. So it's not just Austin. Texas imports a lot of coal. We are the nation's #1 user of coal. We also mine a lot of coal. There's huge bands of lignite in East Texas that is a much lower grade of coal. It's so dirty and lower grade that it's not worth shipping it out of state. It doesn't have that market value, but you can burn it on site to generate electricity. Some of our dirtier coal plants in East Texas burn Texas lignite. But the better coal, to the extent that there is better coal, is this anthracite coal from Wyoming. Statewide, Texans spend about $1.8 billion on, let me emphasize, foreign coal imports. This is a very Texas-oriented slide. That's $1.8 billion that's doing something good for investors in Wyoming coal, obviously, but it's a missed opportunity to invest in local jobs and energy and in a Texas energy economy. So Fayette drains our water supply. Something I did not know at all before joining Beyond Coal is just how much water it takes to run thermal power plants being coal and nuclear. Because they generate so much heat, a lot of water is required for dissipating that heat. So most of that cooling water does get recycled and can be reused as it's recaptured, but a lot of water is also not captured and is lost as it evaporates in steam. By one estimate, Fayette diverts about 5 billion gallons of water a year from the Colorado River to fill up a 2,400-acre lake, its reservoir that the plant uses for firm water operations. Now, what is 5 billion gallons of water? To think about this on a household level, if I were to run a load of clothes in a washing machine that's top down, that's say about 10 years old, a washing machine that a lot of folks have, the amount of water that's in that load of washing machine clothes, it takes 3 to 4 times more water at a coal plant to make the electricity that makes that washing machine go. All right? So that sort of brings it down for me to a human level. What is 5 billion gallons of water? It's a lot of water. When we leave the lights on, when we forget to turn off the television, we forget to turn off the water. Now, when we know Texas' future is water constrained and being in the depths of this drought, it's not hard to know that. It's not hard to ask yourself, in light of this fact, are there not other ways to generate electricity that use less water? So something a lot of folks do understand is that coal plants take a heavy toll on human health. The Clean Air Task Force estimates that more than 10,000 Americans die each year because of burning coal in power plants. The Clean Air Task Force broke down the health impacts just for the Fayette plant in 2010. It attributed 37 deaths to that plant's operation yearly, 55 annual cases of heart attacks, 760 asthma attacks, 27 hospital admissions, 26 cases of bronchitis, and 42 new ER visits because of asthma. There are a lot of numbers up here. I think for the sake of time, I want to focus in on just two. And those are the SO2 emissions and the CO2 emissions. SO2 emissions, sulfur emissions, are what goes into making acid rain. They corrode plants. So when you see pictures in National Geographic of forests in North America or in Europe suffering from acid rain, it's the SO2 emissions that are to blame. In 2010, as depicted on this slide, Fayette produced 27,000 tons of sulfur emissions that were put into the atmosphere around the plant. So interestingly, the following year, Austin Energy and LCRA spent the money to put scrubbers on the plant, specifically targeting the SO2 emissions. And they were so effective that that figure of 27,000 drops down to 5,000 tons the following year. It drops down further the following year after that. So those pollution controls in terms of SO2 are more than 95% effective. Now, they also cost us a lot of money. $240 million is the cost just to Austin Energy that we paid for that pollution control measure. And those costs are beginning to show up on ratepayers' bills and will continue to show up in the future. So my point here is that in the case of sulfur, we have the technology to put on the plant to dramatically control that pollutant if we're willing to pay for it, all right? Carbon dioxide, that's a different story. My son, when I was preparing for this presentation a couple of weeks ago, and he was a hostage in the car as we were driving, and I was talking about, all right, here's some of the data on the coal plant. I was trying to get prepared to share some of this with you. He asked me, well, you know, this coal plant kills so many folks that is so bad for the environment. How come there wasn't a Beyond Coal campaign years ago? Well, you know, it's interesting how kids can ask such good questions. And so 2 weeks later, I think I want to try to answer to you that question, which I didn't do a very good job of answering to him. And I think it's because carbon dioxide is the deal breaker here, all right? There has sort of been, as I see it, a social compact that Americans have had with dirty coal. For a century, we've burned this fuel. It's provided us a lot of this cheap power, a lot of this reliable power. But the deal has always been that as long as, over time, we used our law through regulations like the Clean Air Act and better technologies as they became available, like I talked about with the SO2 emissions. The deal has been with the coal industry and with utilities, if you poison us less over time, this works out. This is my take. I'm not getting this from anybody else. It's my interpretation. But with CO2, it's sort of the deal breaker. The social compact falls apart. There is no technology that we can affordably outfit the Fayette plant with to control that CO2. And whereas a lot of these pollutants are sort of localized in their effects on human health, they disproportionately impact people who are near that plant, or they disproportionately impact people where the waste from the plant is buried, which I think for this plant is in Oklahoma, or they disproportionately impact the folks where the coal is dug out in places like Wyoming or West Virginia or Illinois or in Texas. CO2 is a pollutant that gets everybody. And it disproportionately doesn't get us, it gets our children, our grandchildren. So we enjoy the lion's share of the benefits of power. Our children and our grandchildren disproportionately get the ill effects of the coal. So getting beyond the numbers, it's this picture that helps me understand better than most why coal is a threat to the climate. These trains that come through Texas conveying coal, they're about 120 cars long. Each train car carries about 80 tons of coal. The load for an entire train is more than 100,000 tons. So Fayette, our plant, has been in operation for 33 years. The state is full of coal plants that have been in operation for that long or longer. So what we've been literally doing is moving mountains worth of coal physically from Wyoming, transporting them to Texas, burning them in our power plants, converting them from a solid to a gas, where it goes into the atmosphere and into the active climate cycle. This coal is mostly carbon, right? That was taken out of the skies millions of years ago. It was locked away, sequestered underground as coal. And what we're doing with our coal plants, in addition to making lots of power, is that we have these machines that re-inject it back into the active climate cycle. This is a problem. It's no surprise that we see a recent trend in the temperature record to a warming world when we're layering on more and more of this heat-trapping gas, CO2. So in this slide, we have a century of temperature data. Each line that goes across horizontally is a single year's track of temperature records from January to December. As you would expect, most of the lines are bunched up in the middle where the average temperature is. Highlighted in blue, though, are the 5 coolest years in the set, all down here. Highlighted in orange are the 5 warmest years in the set, and they're all at the top. Of the 5 warmest years, 3 of them are quite recent, 1998, 2006, and 1999. Of the 5 coolest years, the latest is 1924. And this, as I said, all tracks with what climate scientists say is happening, that we're seeing a warming world. But I would point out that a skeptic would look at this and say, well, this is all a recognizable data set, right? This is a recognizable range. You have a couple of the warmest years actually in 1921 and 1934. So now let me add the data available to me from last year, 2012. So the national temperatures in 2012 were unprecedented, and they're far outside the range of what we've seen for over 100 years. Month after month in 2012, heat records were shattered in 49 of 50 states, and it's very alarming that this past year's track is so far outside the range of normal. In fact, it's the fastest warming velocity in 65 million years, according to a study out this August in the journal Science. So we move forward into the future and we ask ourselves, well, what does this mean for Austin, Texas? Where does the burning of coal and fossil fuels take us? Well, it takes us to a climate that doesn't look anything like the one we know and recognize today. According to one recent study that received a lot of national press, by mid-century, every point in the world will have reached a new climate normal, where the coolest year experienced in 2050 is the warmest year we've ever experienced in our lifetimes. Another study that examined changes to rainfall for North America is on this slide. By late in the century, 2080 to 2100, we can expect 15% less rain in spring, 15% less rain in summertime, 20% less rain in Austin in winter, and 5% less rain in the fall. So if we stay on the present course that we're on, with higher temperatures, less rain, higher evaporation rates for soil moisture, then what we're going to do is inevitably change our vegetation regime in Austin. If you want to look for a contemporary corollary of where you would go in the world today to sort of see what a landscape like this would look like for Austin, it's not central Texas, it's central Arizona. And I like deserts, I really do, but I'm fond of keeping central Texas sort of the way I know it. So after these slides, I owe you some good news. It's still within our power to prevent the worst of climate change from ever happening if we choose a different path. So more good news. In 2007, Austin made that commitment to be a leader on the climate crisis. The Austin City Council passed a resolution to make Austin, quote, the leading city in the nation in the effort to reduce the negative impacts of global warming. This resolution was codified in the Climate Protection Plan of 2010, and it set out a range of very significant goals. By 2012, many of those goals had been met before their target dates. To highlight three of them, in 2012, Austin met the goal of powering its city-owned facilities with 100% renewable energy, and it's on schedule to make all city operations carbon neutral by 2020. Austin Energy, the utility, is on target to have 35% of its power mix be renewable energy by 2015. That's 5 years ahead of schedule. And Austin Energy is the nation's leader in providing residential customers the opportunity for 100% renewable power through its Green Choice program. And the Green Choice program in 2012 subscribed more members than any year before, even as it reduced the amount of rebates for participation. So as a result of this policy commitment by the city in 2013, Austin was awarded the EPA's Climate Leadership Award, and this was the first time the award has ever been given to a city. So I would say unequivocally, Austin deserved that award, because what, again, it's doing, what we've chosen to do is make a new social compact. Our climate protection plan by City Council and as a community is our way of saying we understand that the old compact with coal has broken down and that we need this new compact to our kids and our grandkids. So as we look forward to the present, to this year and next year, and we sort of sketch out, can we actually make this step? Can we move Austin beyond coal? There are a couple of factors that I think are really wind at our backs at making this change. One is Texas is right in the midst of an ongoing clean energy revolution. And this is really exciting, and I'm pretty sure I could talk for half an hour just on this, because what we're doing with wind in Texas is extraordinary. We're the nation's, arguably we are the world's leader in wind energy. Texas has an installed capacity of about 12,700 megawatts of wind right now. Annually, the state gets 10% of its total electric needs met by wind power. The state has invested billions of dollars in building this massive transmission infrastructure to West Texas. It's called CREZ. It's an acronym that I'm not going to try to explain. And the CREZ lines, what they're going to do in practice is remove this bottleneck where you have this excess generation of wind capacity in West Texas and a way to distribute all that power to where we need it along the I-35 corridor. So sort of a way to illustrate the potential of wind. Austin Energy this summer in August signed 2 contracts for 570 megawatts of wind from coastal wind facilities, which is now the new thing in Texas wind. Instead of building them out on the plains of West Texas, there's this great build out of coastal wind. So they're due to come online for Austin in 2014 and in 2016, and they'll come in at a cost of 3.3 cents a kilowatt hour, according to reporting by the paper. So to put that in perspective, the average fuel cost for all of Austin Energy's generation portfolio is around 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And with wind, in the 3 states with the most natural gas, Texas, Oklahoma, and Colorado, the cheapest electricity in all 3 is with wind power. So this is just going to continue in the future, and solar is going to duplicate that in the coming years and be right behind. A couple of other factors to quickly highlight. As we've already talked about financially, coal can't compete. Whereas the cost of wind power is going down every year and will inevitably continue to do so, we've already talked about how the cost of coal is going up. Water and carbon constraints. We know that Texas' future is constrained by water and is constrained by carbon. That's two strikes against coal and something that solar and wind do exceptionally well at. And finally, we're Austin. Enough said about that. So getting to sort of where the rubber hits the road, headwinds in 2014, things that make it difficult for us to move beyond coal. LCRA and Austin Energy. My reading of City Council right at the moment in Austin is that they are very ready to move beyond coal. All the things that I've told you about the cost of coal that don't show up on your utility bill, Austin City Council, this council gets that. But they find themselves in a tug of war with the plant's operator, LCRA, and their own utility, Austin Energy. So whereas Austin Energy evaluates coal in this much more big picture way, it's a narrower frame for Austin Energy. Austin Energy tends to evaluate coal through rate and run. How much does shifting from coal impact ratepayers, and how does shifting from coal affect the run of the generation portfolio, which if you dig into that a little bit is also about money. It's the opportunity the utility has to make money selling power on the Texas electricity market. So if the frame for talking about Fayette in the coming year is set by Austin Energy, what City Council is going to hear a lot about is monetary cost to the utility for getting out of coal. And how might that play out? Well, it may not be so bad. In 2009, the last time Austin Energy took a real hard look at getting out of the coal plant, it ran a study called the PACE report, and it found out the cost to ratepayers for getting out of coal might be as much as $35 on an average residential utility bill. That's pretty stout. But a lot has changed in the power market in 5 years. I talked about how wind has come on, more solar, plummeting prices for alternatives to coal. And don't forget, we spend $90 million on coal. It's worth asking yourself all the time, what else could we be investing in that alternatively to just rock from Wyoming? So a friend of mine, Cyrus Reed at the Sierra Club, has recently crunched the numbers on a Get Out of Fayette plan again, and he's found that by increasing the city's energy efficiency goals, increasing Austin's use of solar and wind, and adding some additional natural gas, Austin can phase out of coal over the next 2 to 3 years for around $3 more a month to an average residential customer's bill. $3, about the price of a gallon of gas, about the price of a gallon of milk. So that's where I guess I would say we are now in Austin as we get ready to move forward and seriously examine again, can we live without coal? We're in this tug of war between a city council that is serious in its leadership role on climate and would like to find a path to retire Fayette, and Austin Energy, which is satisfied with existing commitments to greening power and has little appetite for going further than where we already are at. So if we're in a tug of war, how do you win a game of tug of war? Well, I think back to when I was playing tug of war as a kid, and the solution to winning a game of tug of war was to get somebody big and strong to join your team. So there is a third variable at play that I haven't talked about, and that's the citizens of Austin themselves. The reason why there's an Austin Beyond Coal campaign and not a Dallas or an Amarillo or a Houston Beyond Coal campaign is that unlike those other cities, we here in Austin own our own utility, right? And the utilities policy course is set by the 6 members of the city council and the mayor, who are directly elected by you and accountable to you. So if Austinites want to set a new policy course for their utility, they certainly can, if they choose to. So let me close with this image that we're seeing here on the screen. In 2011, the Bastrop County complex fires resulted in the destruction of 1,673 homes, $325 million in insured property loss, and 2 fatalities. The political response to the fires by the state of Texas was a request for a prayer and lots of federal aid. In 2011, the state was in the midst of its worst drought, and we lost an estimated 300 million trees. Another manifestation of a climate crisis. And the state response, again, was a request for prayer and more federal aid. Well, Austin has chosen, as we've talked about, an entirely different leadership approach to climate. Austin has made a commitment to be responsible. And I would argue that we should keep the faith to that commitment going forward.
Richard Halpin.
Thank you, Bonnie, and the Forum Committee for doing such a great job with these talks, and you, Jeff, for your fabulous work with bringing up these data and this important information that faces our whole lives. I had no idea that people were dying in our own community, in our own state, of coal-related issues. So you said the alternative to the coal plant was solar, more wind, and some gas. Now, doesn't the Austin Energy want to put a new gas plant in place instead of the coal plant? And wouldn't that be fed by fracking coming from Bastrop and other places, which just as well as coal destroys our environment and kills our people?
So yes, on natural gas and Austin Energy's perspective on it. Austin Energy, this time last year, a year ago, it submitted a report to City Council in which it actually gave Council a get out of Fayette plan. And its path out of coal was to sell the coal plant to another operator, in which case we would, on paper, achieve the city's carbon reduction goals. All that would be off our books, but it certainly wouldn't be out of the skies because another entity, another power entity, would be running that plant and frankly at a higher capacity than Austin Energy does. So to make up that lost power from coal, again 600 megawatts, Austin Energy requested that council spend the money for 1,000 megawatts of natural gas. It was a gas-centric proposal. It didn't have anything more than that in it. No energy efficiency, no renewables. So you think about what this would do for Austin as someone else runs our coal plant that we don't run. As we ramp on 1,000 more megawatts of natural gas, we're dramatically increasing the aggregate CO2 emissions for the state of Texas. Natural gas is a problematic fuel in itself because of fracking, because of all the water it uses in the extraction process. It's cleaner in many of these emissions that we talked about than coal. You know, it doesn't have the mercury, some of the heavy metals. There are natural gas plants within the boundaries of a city like Austin. You wouldn't have a coal plant. But yeah, you would want to use as little natural gas as possible. It's hard for us to create a model with no natural gas sometimes because natural gas is extremely cheap at this particular point, and it has some virtues that solar and wind don't because it's a dispatchable power source, where solar and wind are intermittent at the time. So some of this is just about being in, again, that tug of war between a utility that wants all natural gas and a generation package that we would advocate that has as little natural gas as possible, but it's not entirely gone.
There's another problem with natural gas, which is it has higher emissions than coal. There's a Cornell study a couple of years ago with Howarth and a couple of colleagues that said that. There was a more recent study that involved NOAA, Harvard University, and Berkeley National Lab, and it also said the same thing, that natural gas, if you look at all the methane that's released during the whole process, has higher emissions. Methane is 35 times worse than CO2 emissions in terms. And so in Austin, as I hear it, and I went to, just to reply to this, is I went to the Austin Energy hearing on Thursday. They're also considering converting to natural gas, and that we seem, it won't be a victory if we stop coal and we allow them to convert to natural gas.
Oh, sure. So one of the interesting things to me as I hear all that is that in the very short time that I've been a volunteer with the Beyond Coal campaign, there's been this reevaluation of natural gas. Going back no further than 3 years ago, natural gas was widely touted, even among a lot of environmental groups, as being this, quote, bridge fuel, right? That it did have CO2, the CO2 component, but it was 50% on the generation side of the amount of CO2 that coal has. But that didn't take into account the fugitive emissions, and that's what, Jerry, you're referring to, that are escaping from the extraction side of the equation. So in this case, wells that are really badly engineered, where the casing isn't done right, where the extraction method is done poorly or sloppily, or just there's no care at all. And so methane, in this particular case, is a much more potent greenhouse gas per molecule than is CO2. So there's been this reevaluation, is my point. Just what does natural gas mean in terms of being a bridge fuel? Is it a bridge fuel at all in the climate crisis? There are a range of studies coming out on that. I have not read them all. I'm just aware that they exist. And right now, some studies are suggesting that, in fact, as you say, Jerry, natural gas could be a worse fuel in terms of climate change than is coal. On the other hand, there are studies that suggest that it's not nearly as bad as the worst case scenarios. And the University of Texas recently did a study that suggested that. I think what I would take away from that right at the moment is that in reality there's a spectrum, right? There are some wells that we can find, there are quite a few wells that we can find that you don't have the fugitive emissions from. On the other hand, there are a lot of wells out there that those emissions do exist. I'll be very interested to know in another 2 to 3 years where the science takes us on that. It's scary.
I'm Crockett Graby. I grew up in the Panhandle, and I remember there's a lot of wind there. I mean, it's a very, very good resource. But I also spent almost 30 years in Iowa, and the thing that really impressed me in Iowa is Iowa's a pretty small state, but they do great wind generation.
Yep.
And I know in western Iowa, I was really impressed by the concentration of the wind generators there. And I remember about a year ago going through the Panhandle, and I was also impressed as how much lower the concentration of wind generators was in the Panhandle than in Iowa. And so, can we utilize the resource for wind generation a lot more and establish a high concentration of wind generation in Iowa to help serve our energy needs?
Yeah, my take on that is the sky's the limit. Once these CREZ lines, what does that stand for? Anyway, once these transmission lines come online, and that's due in December, we can take our 10% of annual electricity that Texas gets from wind and easily take that up to 20%. And as more wind comes on the Texas grid, coal goes off. All right? This is kind of interesting. In the winter, so 2 years ago, Luminant, one of the state's big power providers, and it owns a lot of coal plants, it appealed to ERCOT, the state's grid authority, for permission to take 2 of its biggest coal plants offline in the wintertime for 6 months of the year. And the reason it did that, and it stated quite candidly in its filing, was because if it continued to run those coal plants through the winter, it would run them at a loss. It would dump electricity onto the Texas wholesale market at a loss to wind power, which was undercutting it. This is sort of a seasonal story. The wind in Texas and the Panhandle tends to blow more in the wintertime and the spring. When we achieve our peak power days in wind, it's in those winter and spring months. Also, wind blows much more at night than it does during the daytime, which is sort of a problem. But my point here is, this year, Luminant appealed again to shut down coal plants, but this time 3 of its coal plants in the winter. So coal just can't compete with wind. And as more of it comes onto the Texas grid, more coal goes off, at least for half the year. It comes back on the summer at the moment because the state needs that electricity when we're running all our air conditionings. Iowa, I think I'm right in saying that Iowa gets 20% of its total electric needs met by wind. There are a couple of states that are getting 20%. Colorado is definitely one of total electric needs met by wind. So when I read these letters to the editor in national papers, oh, wind will never work. I mean, people aren't driving to where we're actually working it now. And I'm really excited about wind. Again, the sky's the limit. We can go to 20% easily. As coastal wind comes on, we can do more than that. And then the last little quick caveat, I listened to some folks at ERCOT talk about wind. They are able to handle this variable load right now. You can go onto the ERCOT site, again, our state's grid authority, and see the wind in virtually real time. It's a 15-minute stagger. And it's really interesting to see how their weather models are so accurate day ahead forecasting. So they're really able to use software, technology at their disposal, weather forecasting, to integrate this very variable power source, intermittent power source, stably in the Texas grid.
Thank you, Al Braden.
Hi, Al.
Great presentation, Jeff. Thank you. We were at City Council Thursday when they did a review of Austin Energy. And two of the councilors, the mayor and the mayor pro tem, Cheryl Cole, both called for a serious study of this so they could evaluate whether to buy or sell. Four councilors came out strongly and unequivocally that they believe this plant needs to be closed down as expeditiously as possible. Given that political climate, could you draw out a scenario for us for quarter one and quarter two on how we could achieve that?
Well, I'm loath to get into the prediction market on what City Council would do or what Austin Energy would do. Again, it's interesting how you start with misassumptions or no assumptions at all about how things actually do work. And when I joined the Beyond Coal campaign, I thought really highly of Austin Energy. I actually still kind of do think very highly of Austin Energy, but I have become disappointed to say that I think there's been a cultural shift in the utility over time. Again, from a utility that was eager to innovate on making Austin a leader with renewable energy through all kinds of unique programs, like the value of solar. That's an Austin creation. The utility should be very rightly proud of that. And to this moment in time where the utility, I think, has had enough with innovating, doesn't want to do any more renewables than our existing targets. So in terms of a pathway to get there, I wouldn't make it any more sophisticated that if Austinites show up and want to give voice to the policy direction that they'd like to see their utility take, that'll be determinative. We've seen that happen on a host of other issues. Take the rate case that we had on Austin Energy just from a year ago, right? The initial proposal that Austin Energy came out with looked nothing like the proposal that we eventually put into practice. That's because the council and the utility listened very closely to stakeholders like the churches in town, like advocates for low-income housing, a host of stakeholder groups. If that process is played out again in a way that we want to say loud and clear for our children's sake, for our grandchildren's sake, for just the things that we care about in Austin, then we're going to get a good outcome. And coal will certainly leave the portfolio, and we'll really start investing it in ways that pay off, actually not tomorrow, they'll start paying off dividends immediately today.
Thank you, Jeff. Great presentation. So after the Thursday night Austin Energy meeting, we were sort of visiting with Mr. Weiss, who runs Austin Energy, and he promotes that solar will never be cheap enough to be a real player in the mix, basically. You could say it like that. And you promote solar as a player in the mix. So what is the difference? How do you explain the difference between his viewpoint, which he asserts as though it's God's truth, and your viewpoint?
So I agree with everything you just said, and I've heard that too. I've even seen a slide that Austin Energy put in a generation briefing portfolio to council, which shows where solar has actually been, and you have this plummeting lateral line in price. It's just plummeting, and if the track continues at the angle where it's headed, it's going to cross the cost of new, natural gas, new coal in just a year or two. But instead, the slide shows shows that solar leveling out in the future, inexplicably, because I can't find a study anywhere else that would show that. So I don't know. You'd have to ask Larry Weiss about why he thinks that that's the future with solar. I've not been able to find it. What I have been able to find is folks like Colin Meehan, one of our state's best energy analysts, and he looked at a study in depth that ERCOT itself did on, it's called a long-range planning study, and by law, the State Grid Authority has to update legislatures on where it thinks energy is headed for the state over the next 10 years. And our Grid Authority believes that given likely changes to the cost of natural gas, changes to the cost of wind and solar, all those variables are most likely to see a great build-out in solar. This is even absent any policy supports for solar. So that's a question that I haven't had a chance to put to Larry Weiss, but if I get a chance to, I will.
We have only about 5 more minutes, so we have a question from Gary Bennett.
Hi there. There's nothing that doesn't have its drawbacks. You mentioned with wind that winter is better than summer and night is better than day, so it should be no surprise that the climate science projections say that as the temperatures warm up, there will be diminishing returns from wind. So while it makes a good bridge technology to solar, we could find ourselves about 20, 30 years down the line to be in very perilous states if we were completely dependent on wind at a time when the wind was petering out.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that or thought about that in the future, because of climate change, it could affect that particular fuel source. Let me visit with you afterwards, because I'd like to track that down. I want to just real quickly, you essentially said this, there's no free lunch in energy. All right, there tends to be a drawback at the moment to everything we had. There's also no silver bullet, and I wouldn't count on one either. I don't think I would count on fusion to save us, or coal fusion in Italy to save us. Yeah, I agree. There are drawbacks and costs to a lot of these alternatives. I've thought about this some too. I guess I would say to that I find myself compelled as a parent to try to find the existing path. Not because I really want to leave fossil fuels behind, but because I feel that we must. There's just, at the end of the day, no arguing with the physics of the situation that we find ourselves in.
We've got a question from Leslie Kearns, our forum co-chair. Would you stand?
Thank you. You mentioned that Austin Energy only owns about half of, or somewhere around half of the stacks at Fayette, and you haven't talked a lot about the LCRA role and how we can get that shut down.
Austin, good question, very good question. I was worried about my talk running long, and I'm pretty sure that if I addressed that candidly, it definitely would have blown it. Because LCRA is a tough nut to crack. When the Austin Beyond Coal campaign was launched, it was sort of a two-step campaign. Think of it as the Texas two-step, right? Step number one was a focus on the city of Austin to make Austin coal-free. And as I've said, because it's a city-owned utility that seems with a, we think of ourselves with this green identity, and deservedly so. And we're sort of a more progressive community in the state of Texas. We have a council that reflects our values in many ways. So it was the logical sort of place to start. But phase two is to retire the entire Fayette coal plant. And that's really organizing up and down the lakes chain to let folks, up and down the lakes chain know the cost, the externalized cost of our use of coal, because that's who you would need to organize in order to put real pressure, meaningful pressure on LCRA. LCRA is run by a board that is appointed by Governor Rick Perry. I think 14 members. Dave, is it 14 members on the board? And so some of the culture at LCRA is frankly radically different than some of the top culture in Austin.
We have a final question from Herman Nelson.
Yeah, I see kind of a conundrum there. Because 50% of the plant is owned by LCRA and half of it by Austin, you're going to have to unify And I'm wondering if the LCRA is wanting to get out of the coal business. Another thing that comes to mind is that people do not understand that carbon dioxide can be poison because it actually will suffocate and take away the oxygen, and that needs to be explained more, I think.
Thank you, Herman.
So there is a real complicated legal pathway that has to be negotiated to get Austin out of this coal plant. And here's another question I don't have answered. How in the world did we get into this relationship anyway, where it was 50% ownership on stacks 1 and 2? That's something to track down. But one scenario that we might end up going with, just hypothetically, is that we consolidate ownership into just one stack, that we transport our 50% ownership stake in 2 to 1, and we consolidate our ownership into one unit. And then when we control that outright, that can be ramped down and phased out autonomously. Well, depends on who you ask. Oh, does it affect the? Okay, there's sort of two ways to look at that. Legally, can you do it? And then, as an operational measure, does it impact the rate of the plant? I think to that second question, my understanding is it does not. That these are autonomous units. But again, that's a little bit out of my depth. But to the extent I've asked that question, the answers I've been told are no, it wouldn't affect the operation of the other 2 units. Like I said, there's that 3rd unit that was built out there in 1988 and as a separate unit. As a legal measure, it depends again on who you ask. Certainly, I think we're going to have Austin Energy sit at the table with LCRA and do some serious negotiating on that. And City Council and Austin Energy are fully aware of that. Another hurdle.
I think we're going to have to close, but I want to say thank you for addressing in such a comprehensive way some of the great environmental challenges of our century. And I hope this is also a call to action for those attending and those watching our programs on Public Access TV. Thank you so much, Jeff, for taking your time to talk with us.